And good afternoon, everybody. It's your host, Steve Ferreira, also known as Lapel Pin Guy. No lapel pins today. I thought I would mix it up. I am really excited, you guys. I've got the whole studio now equipped, um, furnished by Ethan Allen on the accessories and furniture, um, the gear from B&H Photo in New York City. And we really put a lot of time and effort into making this a terrific studio and a showpiece for you guys to pick up on the OK Boomer shows. So today, I started thinking about the theme of getting past COVID-19, and about 2 or 3 years ago, I really advocate hiring a publicist. If you're an entrepreneur like myself, it's always a dicey investment, right? Because there's good PR people and bad PR people, right? And PR costs a lot of money. But I took a flyer a few years back, and I hired somebody to sniff around a little bit on a topic that really is near and dear to me, and that's the combination of ocean freight and food product and medical product and pharma safety as it relates to imported food. And this is really an incredible story. I'm sitting in the CBS 60 Minutes office, pitching the story and then pitching it to the Washington Post. Um, the thing is that when you work on a story for 60 minutes, it is very much an expose type thing where it could take a year to produce. And, because I have a day job, or I should say, my number one love is my ocean freight auditing service. I never thought I'd be a broadcaster or a media type person. So um, the 60 Minutes thing was, my number one life goal to be on that show. And then I decided that maybe the Washington Post, was a great way to pick up some of the exposés that I'm doing in this topic. And again, it's anytime you get into this kind of thing, like, when we talk about our systems in a second in terms of our scope for today, um, what is the issue on food product safety and how can we make it more visible to the American public and the media? These are really unknown factors for the media. And my idea, you guys are going to laugh at this. My idea was to follow, a container from India or China all the way to the port, then all the way to the destination and all the way to the supermarket, and watching them, take the SKUs of frozen shrimp out of the container, and then lab testing it to validate the problem, whether it be a listeria or salmonella or antibiotic issue. That was kind of the expose issue, kind of a I hate to use a media term, but I mean it was kind of a hit piece right on the imported food industry. And again, not really so much the importer, right, who tends to be more removed, right, from the processes that go on with FDA inspections overseas, and of course there's lab testing, in the U.S. to get past, some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. But some of the issues that we talked about in terms of, making the story kind of hum and work, for someone like the Washington Post would be like the basics of food safety. And, my big concern is now that the FDA had stepped away a little bit from being on top of imported food safety because of their monitoring of COVID and COVID related activities. But I must say that when we talk about some of the issues today, the FDA has actually stepped up to the plate a bit more, and or it could just mean that China is trying to sneak more. Try to watch my words here carefully. Expose goods into our pipeline. So you'll see that in a second. It's a really fascinating study, but you know I've been looking at this issue for 5+ years, ever since the CBS 60 Minutes producers meeting, and I can tell you, I mean, I think this stuff is really hidden from the public. It's not. I mean, it's right out there in the open. What you're going to see today is something I did. I mean, it took a little while, and I got to tell you, my guy, my art director, Sharif, who lives in Cairo, Egypt, just got me the deck like 3 minutes ago. So, you know, it's a complex issue, and I think one of the things that I try to do here at OK Boomer. By the way, I'm Steve Ferreira, and I'm presenting today on food safety and imported issues coming from China, and does it make us sick? But you know, one of the things that we did with my art director is try to put it in more of a graphic format, right? So make it kind of a living document. So, you know, NBC or CNBC or Bloomberg or Business Insider, custom suss brokers. You know, I think this is one of those issues that, you know, now that we raise it up, you know, we're certainly getting a lot of people that are trying to emulate what we do at OK Boomer in terms of broadcasting issues on the ocean industry. So let's get into the basics. And again, try to keep me on time here. I know we have about 21 minutes left. But some of the basics I think that the American public need to understand are some very simple terms. So we kind of start with something I'll call or it's actually called this. You know, the FDA structures the enforcement of food and tainted food and food that may corrupt us or make us ill. And so you really have kind of an issue of, in my humble opinion, a triangular approach of three things here. So we have a red list, right? We have a green list, and we have import refusals. So now we're just talking about imports, just to be clear. And again, if you're just joining us, I'm Steve Ferreira, also known as Lapel Pin Guy. We're talking about food safety out of China and other countries. And we're going to be doing real-time examples of products that may harm us. And again, I do want to put a disclaimer on that none of the examples that I show today are, you know, where, you know, you could go in and sample and say, yeah, that's 101%, you know, bacteria. What I'm going to provide today are just real-time examples from the FDA, and I'm going to try to overlay it with big data to show you the relationship to ocean freight. So we have the three lists, or the three factors: the red list, the green list, and the import refusal. So let's start with the import refusal. That's a really, you know, really it's a non sequitur. It's just a stop, right? The import comes in, it's tainted, there's a problem, there's an issue, it doesn't get accepted into the country, and it's got to either be destroyed or sent back, excuse me. And I think maybe in some limited cases, you know, maybe with the proper lab testing, it can get accepted in. But it's an import refusal. I don't think it can get accepted, and I want to kind of retract that last statement. So it just basically stop, don't collect $200, and it goes back to foreign country or destroyed. And as an ex-ocean steamship line guy, you know, we see that all the time. You know, where a product comes in, and the ocean freight is like 2,000, and it goes back out, and the ocean freight is 4,000. And of course, it depends if it's a refrigerated container, excuse me. And again, the issue with many products in food, like shrimp or tilapia or fish, is that, you know, it does require a refrigerated container. Otherwise, the product will spoil and decompose. So the more complicated issues, or the easiest issue to understand, is the green list. And so by trouble zone or commodity type, or for example, mushrooms that have a certain chemical, or shrimp that has, you know, typically a high degree of antibiotics content within the shrimp. There are certain shippers and suppliers that get an FDA inspection at origin, and they are found that their products, even though their products typically fall in the range of products that could be tainted, their issues are that are clear, so they go on the green list. And so that means basically the product can come into the United States without any form of detention or necessarily a hold, or an inspection or a chemical test, a laboratory test. And that doesn't necessarily mean that 100% of those products come in without any encumbrances upon them. No, not at all. But it's a green list, and it really gives a lot of flexibility to the customs clearance systems and the FDA clearances involved or engaged in the product. The trouble zone, or more of like the red, yellow caution light, in my professional opinion, is the red list, right? So the red list is basically the easiest way to explain the red list is if you're on a red list as a vendor, and I mean a supplier in Asia or China or Turkey or Brazil, it basically means, okay, if I import lobster, we're going to show you an example of lobster in a second, in a little minute here. And there's an issue with the decomposition of the lobster, right? So it's what can I say? I mean, it's putrid, right? It's filthy, it's bad, whatever decomposition means. So you're on that list, and that means that the FDA customs can inspect that goods. It can be detained unless you get enough sufficient laboratory testing and origin testing where you've proven beyond a doubt that you go onto the green list, right? So the red list is really kind of like this is really the list you kind of don't want to be on. But it's also the list, in my humble opinion, as an American, as a consumer, and also as an ocean professional, that I think has the most amount of play, right, in terms of where it could potentially harm us. Because you could be on a red list, and it doesn't necessarily mean, due to the staffing, the systems, the computer issues, that your product really will be held and inspected. So it's not 100% accurate, right? And I think that somebody did a study when we looked at the Washington Post article in 60 Minutes. I think 3%, maybe less than 3% of imported food was actually physically checked and examined by an inspector. Now, that doesn't mean that an inspector or customs or the FDA didn't send a detention hold on the goods and said to, hey, in order for us to release this, we need a lab report that shows there's no salmonella in the shrimp. That by itself is a whole slippery slope, right? There's always been the issue of kind of, quasi phony, lab testing certificates. So the whole issue today is a little bit of a subculture, within ocean freight that I think is really important to understand, because the dynamics are that the American public is not as savvy on these issues. And I think, if Trump and the White House and the administration start to see broadcasters like myself or JOC with their new podcast and Freight Waves start to put out more material on food safety, it's going to ramp up the issue to a higher level. So before I start the presentation, I just wanted to share with you those remarks. I'm really glad that I think structured it the way I did. I have no doubt that this would be an awesome piece, for an expose, type news show. And I have no doubt it would apply anywhere in the world, Asia to Canada, especially, we're seeing a lot of that to Mexico. But of course, as an American and talking about American imported product, my concern is with the homeland. And I am deeply concerned about it because, I don't want to get ill. And I got young kids, and, I don't want them to get ill. And, again, I love shopping at, be it Walmart or Publix or, whatever the retailer is. But, I'm certainly going to keep my eyes open if I know a vendor of theirs, had recently been on a list for any of the problems that we're going to talk about today. So let me screen share and just kind of like pay attention to the camera and get the screen share set up to help you guys see some of the issues that are happening here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go full screen here on the screen share. And I think the first thing I'd like to do is give you guys a little exposure on the import refusals. So let me just kind of share that with you and give you an idea of what that looks like as we go forward. So let me tee that up. And so, as I mentioned to you before, the import refusal report, it's something that's online with customs, with the FDA. And the import refusal report is a terrific mechanism for you guys to understand and follow what's happening in terms of cargo that is being detained and sent back. Excuse me, I just increased the yield on that screenshot. So let me give you a few. These are really kind of cute because, well, you'll see in a second here. I picked these for a reason. So these are imports refused by the FDA coming out of China. And this first one is pretty fascinating. It's a manufacturer. And again, you have to be really careful here because, this manufacturer name is I think is really Shenzhen, but you can see there on the spelling that the spelling was really kind of butchered in terms of whether that's Shenzhen or not. So I think that this particular issue was, I want to say it's tobacco vaping cartridges, having to do with the, nicotine and tobacco industry. Because when I did my research on this, and this was detained on April 29th, 2020, you can see here in the refusal date down here. Oops, you know what? Let me, I just realized I have my broadcast screen that I'm on live in a minute. And I just want to take that off. So, yep, back to the issue of the nicotine products. Let me make sure I'm on the right screen share. Okay, so I think I have it back now. So as I did the research on this company, I found that, and again, I'll try to, I'm going to really be careful here and not go out and pick on importers, right? But I think that one of the things that's really interesting about this is that think of the biggest names in the business, right? That are working with this particular vendor, right? I mean, you could only imagine who they are, right? But I mean, this is a major exporter, and you definitely have a lot of cadence in terms of volume coming in here. So I think that if you see what the reason was for the ban, for the refusal, you can see here that it's really misbranding, that it doesn't contain a lot of the regulated names with tobacco products, such as the manufacturer, packer, or distributor, and that the labeling was imperfect. So it doesn't necessarily mean the product was tainted, but again, labeling and misbranding is obviously a huge issue, not only out of China, right, but out of obviously any of the countries that we work with as import and ocean professionals. The next one, and again, this is really just kind of scratching the surface to my presentation, but I loved it so much I wanted to include it. Take a look at this one. This is a manufacturer, Hangzhou Quanjin Biotech, and they had their shipment refused April 22nd, and it's it's a diagnostic kit for testing the coronavirus, which I thought was just so appropriate, for I could not refuse to include it in today's presentation. But I think one of the things about this particular refusal is if you look at why the FDA decided not to let this in, is that this article appears to be a device which requires a prescription from your doctor. So it also is a device which the application has not been filed in terms of the usage application and the approval. So the shipment was refused entry. So if you think about coronavirus tests, if you think about FDA masks, anything that requires an FDA registration, um, again, I think that's why a lot of professionals online, like I know my friend John Monroe, and there's many others that really say trust and trust, but obviously verify in terms of what's going on with the vendors. Okay, so that's kind of the import refusal list, and actually it's a very good segue into. Let me just remove that, and I will share the deck itself. I think that's going to be sharing. Let me just double check. By the way, I use StreamYard for my streaming, and it's a pretty great service. I like the idea of being able to screen share, but it's a little finicky in terms of what it's how you have to kind of navigate through. So I appreciate your uh, allowing me to be authentic and kind of navigate my way through it. But here we go. I think we're in really, really good shape now to carry on for the next 10 minutes or so. And what we're going to see now on the first slide is the import refusal list from China. I decided to take a look and show how many shipments were, there we go, that looks good. How many shipments were refused, month over month, year to year, right? So what do we make of this slide? What shows that, look at, I'm very interested in looking at February 2019 to February 2020. So we had 256 shipments refused out of China this February compared to 68 the year before. And there you see 224 and 187. So the numbers are quite significantly up. Yeah, and again, imports did rise, right? Obviously past COVID, and you had, but what's interesting on February is you had, these are arrivals, right? So you had Chinese New Year and you had a bunch of stuff in there. So maybe that 256 number tells me, and again, we can easily look at that through looking at the FDA stats on import refusals, how much of that is medicine, COVID tests, and so on and so forth. But it's a very high number, obviously, this year. And so, it's kind of like a false positive, right? I mean, the news, you could say, well, obviously, Steve, the FDA is being much more vigilant in refusing goods. But at the same time, the radar scope on China is quite high. So, again, I'll leave it as is and let the reader make their own kind of conclusions on that. So I think that that tells a lot about the import refusals. I think that one of the things that we want to cover now is the red list. And so what makes up the red list where products can be detained and inspected, right? So there's a list that comes out on the FDA website. It's an import alert, and this happens to be by country. So you have from Brazil or Dominican Republic, Budapest, Hungary, Germany, and so on and so forth. And I think that what you see here on the screen is really interesting. Is that a lot of the alerts get published, 2-3 years ago, and they just keep getting updated with regards to new vendors or vendors that are running into problems. But other import alerts get published and more contemporaneously. Like you could see, for example, the fourth one down, import alert 16105, where you have detention without physical examination of seafood and seafood products from specific manufacturers due to decomposition and or histamines. So that was recently added as an import alert. So I know what you're thinking, right? So you look at the published date, 4/22/2020, right? That's when it was published here in the U.S. So the product's moving, on April 1st, and it arrives in the U.S. on April 23rd, 24th, 2 days after that. you guys can all relate to this, right? Similar to the way, and the best analogy I can give you on my take on why this is a problem is it's like bunker fuel, right? Bunker fuel adjusts so January, February, March, April, and then May, June, January, February, March, and then April, May, June. So like bunker fuel adjusts on, well, June 1st, right? You're going to have a nice reduction in bunker fuel. But what happens, when the cargo is received or the full quantity of the cargo is received the day before or the day after on the same day? It causes enough invoice and algorithmic confusion in the processing of invoicing that, again, I'm just assuming in my humble opinion that this is one of the reasons why, we have less than 3% of imported food detained and captured and tested, right? A lot of it just, what I'm saying is it just passes through. And so I think that that's really a good way to think through the analogy. It's the timing of when import alerts get published, right? And the cascading of that information to each customs region or FDA region. Because remember, there are different regions in New York or in LA or Chicago and so on and so forth. So I think that the import alerts are extraordinary and very important to make public. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing that today is you just don't see it, right? And this is the, part of the crown jewels of understanding the problem. So the import alerts run a couple pages here. I'm just trying to pick out, here's a good one here, import alert 1681. It was just published on May 18th, 2020. And it's detention without physical examination of seafood products due to the presence of salmonella. So detention without physical examination, right? So that means they can just hold it, they can detain it, and they don't even have to go in and test it that cargo has a specific problem. The flip side of that is the onus is on, obviously, the lab and the ultimate importer and the shipper to coordinate, a testing to validate that product is free of drug or disease. So these occur all the time, and I'm always on the lookout for, as I said, something that's published on, May 18th. Well, I mean, that's already on the water or it's already, come in. So, each one of these, I could probably, without fail, find examples where the import advice was published. The alert was published on 2 days or 3 days before the arrival in LA. And then I could actually show you that the cargo was picked up without any hold. And that's the other thing I want to talk about today before we get to the next step. So the examples I'm going to show you, I decided it's best to leave out the tracking information. But I can tell you that I personally have tracked all the cargo that's coming in on some of these 3 or 4 defective issues that we're going to talk about. And I could see that there was no detention hold and there was no customs exam. In other words, the cargo was off the vessel on May 1st. It was picked up by the trucker on May 2nd, returned empty on May 5th, right? So just like a normal container, even though the goods, have been on the red list or the import alert list. So let's kind of, let me just kind of go back to the thumbnails. And I have just a ton of examples on the import alerts, and I'll make the deck public to anyone that wants it. But let's go to some shipment profiles, and these are really, really interesting examples. I think that if you look at these vendors that we're going to cover today, let's just start with the first one, Kitchen Express Overseas. And this actually was a refusal. And this is Kitchen Express is a vendor in India, and they make bakery products and confectionery products. And the refusal date of this particular shipment was April 29th, 2020. So again, similar to the other examples I told you, but now we have, I've added a little color to this to help you guys see the magnitude of the issue. So the reason why the product was refused, and in my professional opinion, this is probably one of the, well, there's going to be those FDA experts that say, "Oh, Steve, don't worry about that. You know, you got to worry about the salmonella and the listeria and the bacteria." But I mean, if something's filthy, right? It's filthy. So listen to this. The violation code on this particular issue is filthy, and it's basically that the article appears to consist in whole or in part of a filthy, putrid, or decomposed substance, or be otherwise unfit for food. How do you like that coming into your supermarket? No, I don't think so. Not for this boomer. By the way, Steve Ferreira, you're watching OK Boomer Live, and we're talking about food and farmer and product safety coming out of China and other countries. Thanks for joining us. You guys are great. So the color that we added to this is a little bit of a slippery slope. So thanks to some tracking that I'm able to do, you can see here that 10 days before the alert was issued, our Kitchen Express had a container of the similar type product that came in, all the way into the U.S. So into the East Coast, and so the product got through, and I did the tracking, and it just got through perfectly. Now, they did have product stopped, right? And is it possible that 10 days before the import refusal, that it was just a one-off? It could have been, but again, I don't like to take chances, and I just like to share the information that, if you're thinking about food safety, I think it's important to think holistically across the board. So I think that if you look at that particular issue, we can then go into look at, try to do some of these others a little quickly. This Gansu Growland really kind of, again, stuck out at me. You can see here, this is from China, and jujubes, it's a type of red date material. The refusal date was April 21st, 2020. And so that was where the container was denied entry into the U.S. and mandated to be destroyed or sent back. And if you kind of look down at the reason, it's the same as the previous example on Kitchen Express, where the data is filthy. The product is filthy and adulterated, right? So not the best of conditions. And again, look at the date. The product was refused April 21st. And this product actually entered, a similar product actually entered the U.S. and arrived on May 4th. So you can see the shipper here, the product, and 4 containers. That product came in 10 days or 12 days or 14 days after the alert, or 20 days, excuse me. So again, this product is in the markets now. It's in consumption, it's in production. It didn't get stopped, right? To the best of my knowledge. So it's something I think to really keep an eye on. The next example is, let's see if I can do this one, Hainan Jung Foodstuffs. This one is China. It's cookies, biscuits, wafers. The refusal date of the shipment was April 2nd. And if we put a little color to it, oh, excuse me, this is really different, right? So this one is different than being filthy. This one didn't describe the allergies or what allergies may be present in the product, and the list ingredients was less than acceptable to the FDA, right? So when I think about a product like this, I kind of start to think it goes into maybe a specialty, Chinese or ethnic type food store. I don't know, but I'm not suggesting that. But we've all seen where products come in and it's had an aftermarket label having to be affixed by the broker or the OTI or the warehouse, made in China or with the allergens. So I think a lot of times, those situations occur as a corrective action, but in this case, it was totally refused. But you could see here, let me just go back to the date. So the date it was refused was April 2nd, and another styled shipment came in on April 16th. There you can see there, April 16th, 2020, one product, one container into the US from the same manufacturer. Again, keeping in mind that maybe this one was not defective, but it also doesn't mean that it was not a problem. It just means it fell through whatever safety net might have been in play at the time. So I think that's a really important issue to keep in mind. I think we're getting close to some of the big ones here, and I think that this one, to me, the next one we're going to do, I think Guangdong Aquatic. This is my problem. So this is actually a red list shipment, right, where the product is tilapia, and the issue is sulfadiazine, which I believe is an antibiotic that's in the fish as to enhance the yield and the purity and the parasite reduction in the fish. I should have done a better job on sulfadiazine, excuse me. But I believe it is antibiotic or chemical, pharmaceutical to help reduce bacteria in the product, in the fish itself. But according to the FDA, they don't like that, right? So this red alert, where these products can be detained, was put into effect on March 4th, 2020. And I think when you look at the background on this Guangdong Gourmet, we can go in and take a look at the profile on it, if we can get the PDF to open here. There we go. That's beautiful. So this came in on OOCL, and this came in on May 21st. And again, the frozen tilapia fillet. And I guess what I'm trying to suggest or make known here is that this came in just, obviously a week ago, and I tracked it, and it was picked up, I think 2 or 3 days ago, and returned. No, to the best of my knowledge, no hold, nothing inspected. So the tilapia came in, and again, this is one of those kind of instances where having great big data and advanced information gives me the chance, to work with the media and could say, hey, let's track this and let's get a bag of this stuff and, let's test it, right, for the product. But you see where the puzzle's going with this, where we're kind of taking, what the FDA tells us, and we're kind of taking big data, right? So I think the structure of what I'm really doing today at OK Boomer Live TV show is we're trying to marry the two, right? Ocean data and FDA data. And no one's really ever done that before. So, I think we're on to a real breakthrough. So let me just kind of conclude with a couple of things here on the next one. And tilapia seems to be a big issue, right? And if you look at the next violation that we have here, is we had another vendor, Hainan Golden Spring Foods, with the same issue, sulfadiazine in the tilapia. However, this was published on 4/14. So remember kind of that, synergistic date range of 4/10 to 4/20, where it's kind of in a no man's land, right? In my professional opinion. So this was published on 4/14. If we go look at the shipment itself, if we can open it, just a sec. So 4/14 was the published date. Come on, open up. And yes, there we go. Love that. These files are quite big, so thanks for bearing with me. So We had the product coming in again from this vendor on May 21st. Same issue in terms of same commodity, tilapia. So we were, May 21st was the actual arrival date, and it was picked up without any kind of hold or apparently, in terms of what I can see systems wise, it was picked up by the trucker quite quickly after discharge. This arrived on May 21st. And if we go back to the profile on that, you can see here, April 14th was the alert date. So again, maybe this is a container that should have been more closely inspected. Maybe it slipped through, maybe it was fine. Last but not least, actually there's two more to go. I love lobster, and I just thought this was kind of like icky. And, far be it from me to, pick on China, because each country has their own issues. So this lobster, particularly in question, came out of Brazil, and it was published on 3/4/20, and the lobster was just bad. It had some kind of decomposition stuff going on with it. So the vendor is Prime Seafood, and if we look at the data on Prime, hopefully we can get this to open. Yes, this is actually more of the description on the issue. And this is actually what the red list looks like. I wanted to actually do this separately. So you can see here, the firms here are subject to detention without examination under this red list. And if we scroll down to the vendor in question, we have here the Prime Seafood, Spiny Lobster, Rock Lobster, and the date published is March 4th, where the decomposition was enough to put it on the red list for detention issues and further examination. So if we switch back over to, we're on the same profile here. So 3/4 was the red list hold or detention hold. And we can see here, April 19th, we've got the vendor Prime Seafood with the Rock Lobster coming into the USA. And I put a little matrix at the bottom where it's coming into New York, and this is a little bit more of the shipment profile on this particular lobster product. So again, it came through, and whether this had any encumbrances on it, it's hard to say. But it was, obviously, if you're, going to a seafood restaurant and their supplier is Prime Seafood, I got to think a little bit about it. So these are the tough questions that you have to ask. The last example, and we'll conclude our OK Boomer presentation. I like this one. This is an importer alert. Again, something that's detentionable without inspection. And this merit has to do with the product being fresh produce being packed under unsanitary conditions. And so I think this list is quite small. But one of the things I did find as I scroll through, and I think you'll see that we have a vendor here. I'm going to botch the name here, El Pedregal in Peru. And the grapes were, according to the FDA, packaged under unsanitary conditions. And this alert just came in on 4/28/2020. And I think that one of the things you see here is this is a list of all imports into the U.S. And so they have had a ton of material coming into their buyers in the U.S. In January, February, and March. And obviously this issue was identified not so long ago. I didn't check to see how much has come in, between April and May. But the point is that, I'm a golfer, right? So in golf, we have a saying, never up, never in, right? So if you don't get the putt to the hole, there's no way it's going to go in the hole. But it's kind of like this. I mean, you fool me once, you fool me twice, type thing. I mean, the product's coming in. Does it mean that, all of a sudden, miraculously, in February, March, the conditions were pristine, and then all of a sudden something happened in April to cause the unsanitary nature of the red alert to occur? It's entirely possible that that's what happened. But again, we're looking at holistically, what's safe and what's not safe. So kind of to summarize, I think the green list is, your best bet. If you have a vendor that's on the green list, they're clear, they're free. There's no encumbrances on the product, right? Red list, detention without examination, testing, refusal list. Nothing that's coming into the country is really it's really permitted. Let me just see if, as we kind of finish up, if we have any questions. Let me just. Let me stop the screen share, and I will just check to see if we have any questions that came in. Let me just double check on that. It looks like everyone is good with the strength of the presentation. Oops, the PDFs weren't showing on the screen. I will have to. I'm sorry if some of those glitches might have occurred, but hopefully in the playback, we'll get back some more quantity to you on the documentation on that. So, yeah, I mean, it's a technical work in progress, and appreciate the allowing me to be authentic in terms of trying to show the materials. So I think that's a good wrap for today on product safety. I appreciate everyone attending, and we'll get the data up to anyone that wants to see it, and hopefully we can make this a topical area. So from the Hartford, Connecticut area, this is Steve Ferreira on OK Boomer Live signing off, and have a great weekend. Thanks for joining.